All right, y'all. Um, Today we're continuing on with what we worked on yesterday, which is find the equation of a parabola given some information. Uh, in this case, the information, rather than saying, hey, this is the vertex, here's a point it goes through, instead they've given us a graph. In this case, this is the human cannonball graph, which shows you the height of the person being launched at the very beginning. So when their x value is 0, they start at 20 feet high. They get launched. They reach a maximum, also their vertex, of 25 feet in the x direction, 30 feet high in the y direction, and then they start to descend till they land at 10 feet high, which I assume would be the net, and they're 60 feet away. So we have three data points that we can use, and one in particular that's very important is this vertex. If you remember from yesterday, we talked about when to use vertex form, so I'm going to write down that vertex form again. They tell us the vertex, right there, that maximum. And the maximum in general is just the y value. But if you can locate that y value, generally you have the x value, and that is your vertex. So our vertex in this case is at 25, 30. Remember, that is your h and your k values. So right away, if I'm trying to write the equation for this parabola, I already know h and k. H is 25, so I'm going to put a 25 in there. And k is 30, so I'll put a 30 in for k. So I know everything about this equation, except I do not know this a value. And so we're just going to go ahead and calculate a. Well, how do we calculate it? Well, if I knew an x and y value that was on the parabola, then I'd have every number filled in except for the a, so I could solve for a. So I'm going to pick a point. Now, I could pick 2 points. Either one of these would work. I could use this point right here, which is x is 60, y is 10, or I could use this beginning point where x is 0 and y is 20. I'm going to use the 0, 20 as my point, just because 0 is a nice number to work with, because when you multiply by it or have to add to it, the math becomes relatively easy. So my x and my y, I'm going to say, hey, y, when you are 20, so I'm going to set the y equal to 20, x, you must be 0. So I'm going to let the x equal 0. Just a direct substitution. Now we just have to crank out the math here. So this is 20 equals a times 0 minus 25 is negative 25. Plus 30, we got a square now. We have to follow order of operations. So 25 squared is 625, I think. Oops, I've squared it. I'm going to subtract this 30 now, undo my addition. I've gone into solving mode now. It's negative 10 equals a times 625. Divide by the 625. And a is negative 10 over 625. Now those are both divisible by 5, clearly. So negative 2 over, what's that going to be? I think 125. Now that tells us our a value. In our book, they actually converted this to a decimal, which is fine. So negative 0.016. I think it's easier to write the fraction because you don't need a calculator at that point. Now, let's get to our final answer. So, way back up here, we had our equation, except we didn't know the a value. But we just calculated what a is, and therefore we can write down what the a value is in our equation. Y equals, here comes the a, negative 2 over 125, or the negative 0.016, either one. x minus 25 squared plus 30. And we now have the equation for this parabola. All right, so that's our first example. That looks like the first two problems on your homework today. Look at example 2. This is like problems 3 and 4 on your homework. Same idea. All right, find the equation of the parabola, and they give you a graph. But this one's a little bit different. They give us 3 points, just like the previous problem did. This one actually gives us 4. But we don't know the vertex. But what we do have is the X-intercepts. And that means we're going to use the X-intercept form or the factored form of the quadratic equation. This one apparently shows temperature versus hours after midnight. So you can imagine as time goes on, temperature drops. These are after midnight. And then slowly morning comes and things start to heat up. So that's what it's telling us. Let's write down some key points that we know. We know the X-intercepts. So this is very similar. Once you interpret the data, it's very similar to yesterday. X-intercept, it crosses when x is 6, and it crosses right there when x is 21. Now if you remember this factored form, it looks like this: y equals a times x minus p times x minus q. And remember or recall, p and q are the X-intercepts, which means we can use direct substitution. Where there's a p, we can plug in the 6, and for the q, we'll plug in or substitute in the 21. So our equation begins to look like this: y equals a, x minus, here comes that substitution, times x minus, here comes the other substitution, 21. Now, the only thing we need to find out, again, just like in the previous problem, is a. Well, to find a, we just have to use a point that we have not used yet. In this case, hopefully it's obvious to us. I would use this point because they labeled it. You could use this point, but you'd be guesstimating at that point, just because you don't know exactly what the x or the y value is there. So I'd use the point that they tell you the values for. In this case, they tell us when x is 0, that y is 6.3. So we just have to do direct substitution again. When y is 6.3, the x value has to be 0. So where there's an x, I'm putting in a 0. And then let's do some math. So 6.3 equals a times 0 minus 6, negative 6. 0 minus 21, it's a terrible looking 21, negative 21. We'll do that multiplication at this point. I think it's 126. It'll become positive. And finally, we'll do that division to get the a alone. Divide by 126. And so a is equal to 6.3 over 126. And I'm going to grab my calculator since I have a decimal inside a fraction. That's just bad form. That's mixing different number types. And so I'll just grab my calculator and we'll find out that is equal to 0.05. And now if we come up here to our equation we'd written, we knew everything except for a, except now we have calculated a. So we can write our final equation for this parabola. My a, my 0.05, x minus 6 times x minus 21. And that's our final answer. That is the equation for that parabola that they initially gave us. All right, we'll walk through these today in class again. But this way you have this recording as a reference.